I'd like to welcome everybody to the September 15th monthly work session. Mrs. White.
Today, as part of our charter school review process, we will be considering an application. So I'd like to ask Dr. Roca to come forward, and we'll lead the board in this discussion.
Good morning, school board members, Superintendent White. As you can see on your agenda, we have the presentation of a proposal for a new charter school submitted by the Northport Collegiate Military Academy founding board members who are here today to have the discussion with you about their proposal. And today's format is casual in that there's no presentation, basically an opportunity for you to engage in the discussion with the board members of the proposed school. But if you allow me, I'd like to give a brief recap of the process here that we follow in Sarasota County. As you know, it's pretty comprehensive and thorough. The applications, we received the application for Northport Collegiate Military Academy on August 3rd, and we have a committee composed of experts in all of the areas that correspond to the 19 areas in the application. And we also have representation from our school-based leaders and from charter school leaders, as well as community members, well, one community member. And that really helps. They bring a different perspective to the process. And as you know, the applicants follow the state's template for an application, and the committee follows the state's evaluation tool for the analysis part. And so today is basically the second step in the process. The committee submitted to you their preliminary findings, and again, preliminary, because we do give the applicants an opportunity to respond to some questions that the committee had, some clarifying questions, and those will be submitted to us on this Friday, September 18th. The committee will reconvene again next week and look at their responses to determine if they're acceptable or if we still have any pending questions and issues. And after that, we will have, the CRC will have an interview with the founding board members, again, to either corroborate information in their application or if we have any outstanding or pending questions. And after that, we will submit to you the final report of our findings, and you will take action at the October 20th board meeting to either deny or approve the application. So that's the process. And anyway, it's pretty thorough, and I think our committee does a fabulous job. It's time-consuming, and as you know, this year we received only the one application, so that's why I look refreshed, as opposed to last year when we had 6 of them. So, not that I have extra time, Superintendent. All right, with that, I will bring up the...
I have one question.
Yes,
you said after this it'll go back and then come back before you. It's my understanding that they can't make any significant or substantial changes to the original application.
Correct. The applicants are permitted an opportunity to clarify some things, but not to pretty much amend their charter. So if there are some significant deficiencies where, say, suppose a big section is missing, if we were to allow them to submit the entire section, that could be considered a material change to the original application.
Or to go in and say, correct.
Right.
They
now, sometimes you'll notice that we might raise an issue as a concern, but also provide an opportunity for a clarifying question. But in some cases, if it's significant or substantial, we don't pursue any further questions because it would be pretty... The questions need to be where the applicant could respond briefly. If you have to respond by submitting a whole nother section or a 5-page essay, then that really is not a brief clarification. It's worked well for us in the past. We want high-quality charter schools. As you know, we do have them here in Sarasota County serving our students. So, all right. Okay. You're on.
Yes. Actually, here we go. Good morning. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Jody Kopaz, and and my founding board have proposed Northport Collegiate Military Academy. I would like to thank Lori White, Superintendent, and Frank Kovac, Chairman of the board, along with the School Board of Sarasota County for this opportunity to speak and introduce my founding board, of which all are here today. A little background myself. I have been in Sarasota County in the school district for 18 years. I am quite aware of the charter school movement, as I was at Sarasota School of Arts and Sciences when it first began and was there for 7 years. Following that, I moved to Sarasota Military Academy, which was in its its third year, and was there as an educator and as the assistant headmaster, and was there for 8 years. I fully and wholeheartedly believe in the charter school movement in Sarasota County. At this time, to my left, I introduce to you Dr. George Spagnola. He has been an educator. He has been an administrator. He currently is the chairman at Argosy in education, not only for the Sarasota University campus, but also the Tampa campus. He has an extensive 40-plus years in education and has worked with the Department of Education on many aspects related to education. Next to Dr. Spagnola is Dr. Joseph Brawley. Dr. Brawley also has an extensive educational background, teaching at the high school level and at the collegiate level. He currently is employed with Charlotte County at the university level. Dr. Brawley was one of the first founding teachers at Sarasota Military Academy. Next to him is Mr. Richard Suggs. He is our accountant. He has 20-plus years in accounting. He is the founder of the Suggs Group and a current business that he's also working on, Shop Local, which is encouraging community and business initiatives in Northport and the surrounding areas. We have Stephen Hazuda, who has been with the district and teaching for 20 years. He currently is the ESC liaison in a Sarasota County school district. And he has also he's also been a administrator as well. Next to me, I have Patty O'Mara. She is the CPA. She has, again, an extensive background, and she has, again, 40-plus years as a CPA. We have Mr. Dan Kennedy. Dan Kennedy has an extensive background in education, 45-plus years. Dan Kennedy is and was the co-founder of Sarasota Military Academy, which was the first charter military academy in the nation, of which NPCMA is structured on that value of military and military environment in a school setting. We propose to bring Northport Collegiate Military Academy to Sarasota County School District. The academy will be based on grade levels of grades 6 through 12 in a small learning environment. We seek to have 232 students, a small environment, and we hope to bring STEM initiatives, science, technology, engineering, and math, not only for high qualified jobs, but also to prepare our students for the future. We would like to offer college-level courses applicable pending board decision. We look forward to this opportunity, and we thank you very much.
Board members, and you've had a chance to review the input from your committee. And so if there's any areas that you would like clarification for, and this is your opportunity to ask the applicants any questions that you like for clarification purposes.
I say that's a rarity.
I'll go first, I guess. I had a couple questions, and thank you for allowing us the opportunity and for all the hard work. I know that there was a lot of members in the community sending us emails in support of your charter school. But as you know, it's obviously it's a rigorous process, and we want high quality charter schools. So one area I had a question on was the financials, which is on addressed on page 43. We in the overview application. I know that population is going to be smaller, which I think has a lot of benefits, but it seems that there are a lot of financial controls. It says the concerns were financial controls and internal controls are generally referenced, but the application does not include any copies of established financial policies or procedures. Do you have any additional insight on that? And because that's obviously a critical area for this, the ability for the school to sustain itself. Anyone who wants to answer.
All right, you'll have to move the mic.
Basically, to address that issue, we had a meeting with the person who was going to be the outside CPA who's going to handle, hopefully, the audit. We were trying to negotiate an audit price in advance and expect to confer with him another time to include, if you want, a more extensive review of that particular area. Does that answer your question?
Well, to a degree, I think that as far as a timeline to provide us with that additional information, I think you guys are still in that process, or?
We're still in that process.
Okay.
Did you hear me? I'm sorry.
Nope, I did. I don't know
We'll
if the
make
other
sure
board members did.
all internal controls are set in regards to meeting the staffing. We will make sure that we have highly qualified instructors. I understand that our population is small, and there may be concerns in regards to salary and meeting those needs.
Mm-hmm.
I can say, for example, when I started at Sarasota School of Arts and Sciences, I started at a salary that was not at the district level. I had that vision of a teacher that understood what a new concept would be like, and I did not mind the reduction in salary because I knew the outcome of the possibility of an outstanding charter school, and of course Sarasota School of Arts and Sciences is an outstanding charter school, and then as well as Sarasota Military Academy, not only as an educator but as administrator. My salary was reduced, but for the cause and my belief in education, that's how I feel that the discrepancy, even though the salaries may be low, I still think that educators have that drive to accept that salary.
One more, since no one else is.
Thank you.
I found on page 21 the drug test policy. I thought that was interesting, but there was a concern raised in here. Did you guys have an opportunity to review that?
Yes.
Speak to that.
I appreciate the review committees and the board of directors' views in the drug testing policy of Sarasota County School District, and pending approval, Northport Collegiate Military Academy will follow all aspects in regards to the drug policy, and we will not random drug test at our school. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to compliment you on a great-looking board. I mean, I think you come from diverse areas. You represent the community, exactly what we want in a charter school. However, you've seen the review of the application. The only one thing that fully meets is the food service, and that's because you're contracting through the school district. There's a lot of the partially meets, and there's a lot of issues in the financials that aren't clear. The policies and procedures, I don't think you wait for a CPA to come in that you hire for audits to set some of those things up. And, you know, if they're not there, they're not there, and you can't change that application. But what really concerns me is the educational part of your application. You know, it talks about Common Core and the old Sunshine State Standards, and there's been a lot of information in the news, and I would imagine you should know, if you're setting up a school, that the standards have changed in the state of Florida. I don't know how you all missed that in this application. And it's just you don't meet so many things on the educational plan, which to me, you know, besides the financial, it was the meat and potatoes of this. And I mean, I don't even want to list them all out. I mean, it was like you don't meet almost all of them. Yeah, you can respond anytime. Yeah.
Thank you. We definitely, based on the recommendations of the review committee and the questions that they have provided, we will supply what is available, the answers available, to make the application and the questions and the answers clear to the review committee and to the school board. In regards to the educational program and the design, yes, it was quite devastating to read that. There were some aspects of the curriculum plan that they were saying that the review committee, as you had said, were outdated, or the testing material was outdated. How I can address that is when the application was written, this is written for the 2016 opening of 2016-2017 school year. The high school progression plan, the middle school progression plan, that's posted under the curriculum and instruction on the Sarasota County School District page. Currently, the title is High School Progression Plan 2014-2015. When I was working on this application and my founding board was working on the application, what was available for us to write for writing this application was the 2013-2014. That was what was posted and available to us in using a reference.
But didn't somebody say, oh, wait a minute, these are outdated? The legislature updated the state standards? Didn't anybody catch that? Obviously not. I'm sorry.
Well, indirect what you're saying, I understand what you're saying, but here's something that applies directly to your school. The applicant does not provide a clear description of the military-related educational programs and the research base for the educational programs. I mean, that you could not get off our website. That had to come directly from you, and that's not clear in your application.
Thank you. In regards to the curriculum, what has been presented, there is, in regards to the National Middle School Cadet Corps, the program, the 3-year program, including each class, is presented in the application. In regards to the Air Force JRTC program, those courses are also presented in the application.
Do you have a contract or a letter from these organizations that you say that you'll be working with, agreeing to be a partner with you?
The Air Force application, although has not been filled out, has been attached to show that the district and the review committee that we will be filling it out. Currently, because we are not approved by the district, we cannot receive a unit, an Air Force unit, because we are not approved by the district. There is a process in regards to having a JRTC unit. And Mr. Kenny, would you be able to describe the process?
Sorry.
Well, the school does not expect to have a certified JROTC unit for the first year or two, probably. That was the same case with SMA. We went with National Defense Cadet Corps, which essentially can be applied to any branch of the service. The only difference between that and a certified ROTC program is the school will have to be responsible for purchasing the uniforms. But that is the fast-track way to get an ROTC unit. Start off with National Defense Cadet Corps. And all of the competition, drill competition, rifle competition, all of that is exactly the same. The only difference is the school would be responsible, as I said, for purchasing the uniforms. So that's probably what would happen for at least the first year. SMA was fortunate at the end of the first year we were able to get the Army JROTC unit. But the first year we operated under National Defense Cadet Corps. And I was able to contact West Point, and they sent down a couple of truckloads of uniforms for free. And I think that we can probably imagine that we can do something very similar to offset the cost of the uniforms. But you can't really do anything until a charter is approved. You can't negotiate. You can't fill out the paperwork. You can't. They won't even talk to you until you have an approved charter. But we do know that we can go National Defense Cadet Corps. So the students will be in uniform and they'll be doing ROTC type activities.
Yeah, I did notice somebody on your end of the table that's had some experience in building military academy charter schools. And I remember having these very similar conversations with the middle school when we approved that charter.
Right.
And I think it's worked out pretty well.
Yep.
Can you kind of tell us what the similarities and the differences between your SMA middle
Well,
school, high school,
I
and
think this
Northport?
proposal may be better in that both groups of students will be housed in the same facility rather than 40 minutes apart, as is the case with SMA Prep and SMA right now. The original concept meant that we would have a lot of commingling of teachers and cadet leadership, high school cadet leadership on the middle school campus. Having both groups of students at the same spot at the same time will greatly facilitate that interaction. My vision is to see the older cadets tutoring and teaching leadership skills and working with the younger kids, to give them the self-confidence that they need to become effective leaders in the future. And I think it will work out very, very nicely. We, as you know, SMA Prep ends up having to handle their own uniforms. It's not an ROTC unit. It's a pseudo-military environment that's created at the school. But I see the kids every morning getting on their buses, and the concept is working great. The other day I was out running, and I watched them. There are a whole bunch of kids lined up. You're not lined up. They're just messing around waiting for the bus. And then the bus came, and I thought, well, I'm going to watch this and see what happens. And as soon as that bus stopped, they formed up into a single file line instantly by themselves and quietly, orderly got on the bus. It was really a cool thing to see. And I think we can see and expect the same type of behavior changes in the kids at the Northport Collegiate Military Academy.
So can you follow up with my question as to what the similarity with curriculum?
Yeah, well, at the middle
between
school level, obviously you can't have JROTC, but we do have military studies, and we hired a person out there that has vast military experience to be the director of military studies, and he facilitates and designs the military activities such as teaching the ranks, the drill of how to form up, how to march, how to recognize leadership, that type of thing. So, and then of course you have the older cadets coming out there and also teaching those types of things, after their school day is over. At the high school level, the curriculum will be determined by Cadet Command at the Air Force, and they will provide all the textbooks and all the instructional manuals and computers and everything that's needed for the instructional program at that level. But at the high school, it will be one class every day. Students will wear the uniform every day except probably Friday when they'll wear polos. And the same will be true at the middle school level. That they'll get a military studies class every day, one period a day, or at least part of a period every day, depending on how the master's schedule works out.
Jane?
Well, thank you all for being here. It's good to see such community involvement. Breathe, Jody. It's okay. Don't be nervous. We're not going to bite you.
You're not. You can only speak for yourself.
That's right. That's right. But basically, my concerns are looking at the overview that Dr. Roca so beautifully presented to us. There are 19 options, 19 areas that the state requires us to look at in terms of a charter application. There's the educational plan section, the organizational plan, and the business plan. The two most important for me are educational and money, the budget. There is a does not meet in curriculum plan, student performance assessment and evaluation, exceptional students, English language learners, and some of the things that Dan provided us are things that should have been in the application. I read the application. It's like making vegetable soup. You make the soup, it tastes great. You say, what's in it? I didn't see what was in it so much from looking at your application. You have an educational doctorate. We're all educators. We're accustomed to seeing much more of a drill down in terms of reading program, which wasn't addressed fully, curriculum and that sort of thing. So those are things that are of concern to me. And then the budget. I know teachers need money to live, and the fact that will they, in fact, be willing to perform at a high level? You're talking about the ability of having them perform AP courses and college level courses. I find that extraordinary that they'll have enough money to live on this particular degree of money, and then I just found that an interesting thing. Nothing to do with what they make at the district, but just looking at the level of income.
Well, when I started SMA, everybody started at $30,000 a year across the board, no matter what their experience or education was. And then as we grew and became more financially stable, we began to pass that on to the teachers, and to the point where I think the school is at 96% of the district salary schedule right now. It takes a little time when you're starting out. It's not easy to start a charter school. Money is a big issue for the first couple of years. And salary is a big part. It's about 81% of the budget, I believe. So we have to be careful with that. And I had no problem finding teachers who would go ahead and invest in a future opportunity. And matter of fact, I didn't even take a salary for the first year myself. Period. Zip. Nothing. Second year, I got $25,000, but it was worth it because I believed in it, and I believe in this program too. And I think it will fly. I think it will probably fill up overnight once it gets started as far as real advertising is concerned. And I think the community in Northport deserves a choice. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of support in the Northport area for this effort. Jody's done a great job integrating into the Northport community, Chamber of Commerce. She has friends on the city commission down there, county commissioners, so forth. They're all aware of it. And I think that it's a needed choice in the area. I remember when the governor came to SMA, and he spent 2 hours at the school visiting and everything. And when he left, he said there ought to be a school like this in every community. And that was music to my ears. Personally, I've always wanted to have a school in Northport. SMA is not able to do it at this point. But I think Jody has the energy level and the expertise and the personality to become the face of that school in that community. And I'll be there behind her.
What about Embry-Riddle? You mentioned Embry-Riddle, but not any specifics of the partnership or any documentation that will happen. Embry-Riddle is over on the East Coast. How can you make that happen?
That will probably will happen easy when the charter is approved. In the meantime, the State College of Florida has an agreement with the county for dual enrollment classes. And also Lincoln University via Cirrus Aviation is already committed basically that they would be able to provide flight instruction and the possibility of some college level classes through them. I'm doing some consulting work these days for Cirrus Aviation, by the way.
Where will the students come from? You mentioned nothing much about Charlotte County, but we know Charlotte County is very near.
It's like SMA.
And nothing about Sarasota Military Academy and taking students from SMA.
Those are great questions, and certainly that was certainly anticipated. The main focus is going to be on Sarasota County students. There are about 80 students, I think, that come from the South County area that go to SMA, and they spend about 2 hours on a bus. I think it would be great for them to have an opportunity to be in their own hometown to finish out their studies. I don't think it will be a huge impact on SMA. Every year I was there, I had 200 and some odd on a waiting list. So I don't think that's going to be a hardship for them at all. I'd be surprised if it is. And so I think that getting the enrollment is not going to be a problem. I don't see that as a problem at all. But we're going to focus primarily on Sarasota County. And we always had kids from Manatee County wanting to come to Sarasota, too, and they can't ride the bus, and that becomes a hardship. And they usually self-select out after a while because it's so awkward to get there in the morning. And so I'm thinking that it'll be mostly Sarasota County students.
And you want to use our transportation service the first year and then buy your own bus?
No, I looked at that in the application, and there's no way to predict when the school will be ready to buy buses. It took SMA, I don't know, something like 8 or 9 years before we could even talk about it. So I told Jody, that we're going to have to go transportation with the district for the foreseeable future, and they always do a great job. Ellery does a great job, and never had a complaint with transportation, and certainly I've always enjoyed working with Beverly in food service.
I'd like to go back to the financial questions. In here it says that the startup budget includes an undetermined amount of revenue dependent upon a line of credit from a local financial institution and uncertain revenues to be derived from grant applications. So that's asking us to trust you that you're going to get this money, because it's not, you don't tell us where you're getting the money from.
Many of the revenue streams that we are looking at are, and we have talked to, different financial institutions. We've talked to different philanthropic organizations, and it's almost like we're behind the 8 ball, because they will not commit until we are approved. Because that's kind of putting a liability out there that they really have no control over. So we are confident as a board that funding and grants and philanthropic donations will surely make up for the shortcomings that you find in this budget. There are monies that we're not allowed to include into the budget that is normally given to charter schools. We understand that. That is probably the least of our concerns. I know that's a concern for you, and you're saying, well, how can we grant without knowing? And I really don't have a good answer for you, because people are not willing to. We have 3 or 4 site selections that until we are approved will not commit. And I understand you're wanting certainties. And
we are responsible for the education of those students, and therefore we have to have these questions answered before. I'm speaking for myself. I'm saying we, but I'm speaking for myself. I have to have these questions answered before I'm comfortable with granting a charter with all of the uncertainties that are out there. Even your ESE, you're going to have 1 ESE teacher to serve 7 grade levels the first year, and 1.5 to serve 7 grade levels in an inclusion model.
Well, we are
touching my soft spot here. Steve knows.
Rich, may I?
Sure.
Richard. Also, in regards to the financials, to make the board and the community more confident, we applied to become a 501c3. We have not even been approved by the district, and we're in that process, obviously, right now. But we wanted to make sure that the school board understood that we are a business. We would like to open an academy, and we would like to do it correct. And in order to do that, we would like to fill out the proper documentations for the IRS and for the state. And with that, we applied with the 501c3 and got the recognition for that and became a corporate entity. And I thought that would be a valuable aspect to provide the community when we do look for support and donations, because we, of course, need those proper documentations to do that. Do you have anything in regards to that? Oh, and we also will apply for the startup grants. Any startup grants, we will utilize those and use our expertise to fill out those adequately. That will help assist the academy.
I support our good charter schools. In fact, my grandson is attending the military prep school. Funny story, the first day he got dressed to go to school, he had his uniform on, and he says, "I look like a police officer. Where's the donuts?" If he got in line to get on that bus, I'm like, chalk one up for you all, because he's not one to get in lines. Which is, I think, one of the reasons why the family was so supportive of him going, because he does have some special needs, and you're meeting that. And, you know, we're going to have a talk on growth management right after this. High school enrollment was surprisingly up, surprised us the amount that it uptook. And hopefully we can look into why that happened, where they came from. Did they come from private schools where maybe they were getting a McKay scholarship and that school didn't handle high school students? Maybe they transferred from someplace else. I'd like to kind of find out where those kids came from that we weren't expecting. But you said that there's a waiting list at the military academy. I thought I was looking at the 5-day counts and they were below what their expectations were. But we can look into that further. And you talk about the teachers willing to come over for a less salary. We're looking at a teacher shortage in across the country right now, as we see enrollment increasing. I think it might be a little rougher to get teachers at below salary, unless you're talking about retired teachers, but then are they going to be up to the new standards? And there's really a lack of discussion about professional development in the application. And I mean, I will support a good application, but not one where 5 out of the 8 in the education plan does not meet and 3 partially meets. I mean, I would maybe do 5 meets and 3 partially meets, but I don't think so.
Well, we hope that when we have an opportunity to respond to the questions, that some of your concerns will be alleviated. As far as teachers coming in for substantially lower salaries, when I left SMA, I had about 250 resumes from all over the country, and they were all making a lot more money than they would make at SMA. I think it's the environment that they're looking for, an ability to actually teach.
But again, you have people who want to, but can they teach to the Florida standards?
Right. Well,
the new Florida standards, and where is that professional development?
You all have known me a long time now, and the kids come first. And I'll never hire a teacher, and I don't think Jody will either, that won't do the absolute very best for the kids.
Just to piggyback on that concern about recruitment of teachers, what concerns me a lot is, given the small number, which is part of the environment you're trying to project, I'm really concerned the combination of such low teacher pay, but also the requirements for multiple certifications. When I look at what you would need to be able to just provide the required high school courses that would permit graduation and all the certifications of those individuals, it is a very big problem. The expectation that you would have someone, even finding a high school person certified in all of the science areas, which would be required given your staffing levels. They're not out there. I'm telling you, We're recruiting in science and some of the higher math, and you're looking for combinations where they would have all of these different certification areas in order to meet the staffing levels, and then you could then provide all those different courses. Dual enrollment requires a master's degree or at minimum 18 hours in the area that you're teaching. Those are not easy to come by. So it is the combination of low pay and incredulous certification requirements that really concern me about how doable is this plan.
Well, when I opened up SMA the first couple of years, over 50% of the teachers were part-time retired teachers, and they did a great job. And then as we evolved, we began to move full-time teachers into those slots. Probably that will be something similar that will occur at this school to make sure that we get all of the required areas covered.
Caroline?
Unfortunately or fortunately, we're in a different era now than when you opened SMA. When you opened SMA, there were an abundance of teachers. We had a lot of our part-time teachers or our substitute teachers were really full-time teachers that were subbing for us because we just couldn't afford because of the Great Depression. So we're not in that cycle right now. We're in a cycle right now where teachers are in demand. So I hear what Superintendent White is saying, and I agree with her. I don't know where you're going to get them from. And you and I have been friends for a long time, Dan. Right. So it's very difficult for me with this plan. It seems like it's the same plan, almost the same plan that came to us last year, and not much of it has changed. And I'm just, it's not there. It's not there. And the educational component is not here. And to say, trust me, I can't say that to a child who will only go through 6th grade once and 7th grade once. I can't say, trust me, this will be a good academy in 3 years or in 2 years. I can't say that. I need to be able to say, this will be a good academy on day one, grade 6th grade, or you enter, or whatever grade you're going to start at. That's what I need to be able to say to myself and to our community, and I can't say that.
Well, you know, I don't know. It's pretty hard to predict what type and who the teachers will be until we actually begin to open up and advertise for those individuals. But I certainly had no difficulty before, and I didn't have any difficulty finding teachers when I left SMA. We were just flooded with applications, and I see the school eventually going to FRS, and at some point, you know, that'll be even more attractive to teachers. And I think that the nature of the school will attract individual teachers. And you know, of course, you know, if we can't do the job, then we'll postpone it, and that's the only thing we could do. But I would never put the kids in a situation, you know, where they didn't have an adequate teacher in front of them.
And I have received resumes for teaching positions. People that have sent. There's a social media page that I set up for NPCMA, and there is an email, and there are educators in Sarasota County that have submitted their resumes to me in regards for employment.
Jane?
Well, I think that's great, but you don't have a component of health insurance defined. As far as FRS goes, the employer has to contribute more than 7% and the employee 3%. That was really not defined correctly. That will take some time, I would think, for you all to be able to afford that. I understand that grants can't be applied for until you have the approval. I get that. But they're not as readily available today as they were in 1998 or 2000. They just aren't. It's much more difficult to get these. It's very expensive to have a high school, to run a high school. You have to have a lot of higher level courses. You mentioned after school activities, art, music, drama, I don't know what that would hold, and sports. Those are not inexpensive. We're trying to start a lacrosse team now at Riverview High School this year with a great deal of help from some private citizens who are really into lacrosse. But those are the things that are of great concern, the lack of defining some of those more specific things. You know, we have CPAs sitting in our audience today, and you know, they understand the financial things a lot better. You have an accounting component here, and that's great. But The things that are of concern to me are curriculum and the budget. And whether teachers live in Sarasota County or Charlotte County or DeSoto County is something that I don't think you can decide or make a difference on one way or the other. Whether students are coming to you from Charlotte County and Sarasota County, you probably, are not as concerned about. But, are we looking at taking our students who are in schools in southern Sarasota County and moving them over to your school? What about the schools that they're in now? What will make them want to be a part of your school? And I think there just are a number of issues that are of concern to me. I think when the community of Northport looked at this and embraced this issue, I think there was some confusion at first because I think that they thought you were Sarasota Military Academy Northport. I got calls with people who said, I want to talk to you about SMA Northport. And I was saying, no, this is not, it's not the same thing. And we love SMA and we love charter schools. We've got an executive director of a charter school sitting in our audience today. And I'm particularly close to our charter schools. The fact that you would become nonprofit and you're not a for-profit entity is music to my ears because we know there are two kinds of charter schools, those that are in it for money and those that are in it for the kids. So those are all things that are music to my ears. But you've got a lot of things to answer, and some of it may be able to be answered and others may not. But for me, the jury is still out, and I hope we can find out some information that will benefit us all in the next month.
Anything else? Well, thank you very much for coming today, and we'll look forward to your response.
Thank you very much.
Not.
Now we're going to the growth management update. As you recall, we've had this issue on your agenda for several times. One really giving you the consultant's report regarding perceived growth or anticipated growth in our district. And this was a promise to return today with the different options that are available to the board in terms of how we are going to support the funding for those new schools that we believe growth will drive. Today is an informational session. It is your opportunity to ask questions. It is for us to understand if there's additional information that we need, that you need, that we can be working on that. So this is not a meeting where we're going to be making decisions, nor do we expect to have some type of consensus. This is an opportunity for clarification of the different options that are available. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Limpy.
Thank you very much. Good morning, board members. And I guess I didn't plan to start this way, but just to kind of piggyback on what the superintendent just said, and I'll probably say this several times during our presentation, but there are literally an infinite number of options What we're going to show you today are some examples of what those options might look like, and I'll talk more about that when we get there. What I thought I'd like to do this morning, and if you'd like to go in a different direction, say so, but just kind of quickly review what we sent you in the read ahead, at least the executive summary, so that you and anybody who may be watching either in the audience or on TV is kind of on the same sheet of music. Go relatively quickly to the options, kind of walk you through the scenarios or the examples that we've included in our read ahead, and then just turn the floor over to the board and allow you to ask any questions or any follow-up that you'd like us to do. Caroline?
For the public, I would like you to talk about impact fees and how they're generated and how they're used, please.
Fair enough. And there's a section in the read ahead where it's kind of definitional. So
For us, we've already read it.
And when I get there, I'll do that. And that's what I'd like to do, just kind of walk through this.
Okay, thank you.
And if I don't do what you asked, stop me when I get to that part. So I guess Lori kind of did the intro for me already. I put a reminder in the read ahead of upcoming events just so you can kind of see where today's conversation fits in the context of what is to come. Today is a workshop, as the superintendent said, to just kind of talk about where you are, give you an opportunity to ask questions, and then any takeaways that we may have to do some homework to come back to you. This evening there is a public hearing on growth management and how we pay for growth management. It's in this chamber at 6 o'clock. The next opportunity that we would have to talk about options would be, unless we scheduled something unique, would be at the October 20th workshop. If the board wanted to do something proactive relative to impact fees, that would be the board meeting when we need to think about doing that. Just when you think about the timeline of amending the ordinance and the work that we'd have to do with the county government to amend the ordinance. So those are kind of the key milestones as we look over the next 2 or 3 months or so. A couple of things that we included just for you to consider as you're debating this. First, we held 2 public information sessions on September the 2nd, one at the Conference Center at STC, one in the cafeteria at Taylor Ranch Elementary School. The North County one was more well attended, obviously, than the South County one was, and I included some numbers in your read ahead. Particularly at the North County meeting, I think there were some really clear messages that were takeaways, at least that represented those who elected to speak. To me, there were some really key messages, kind of overall. The board has to do something with an impact fee. There was a small vocal contingent in that group that would say, and why would you do anything less than 100% of the impact fee? There was there were probably 2 other concerns that I want to share with you. One is relative to taxes. Several folks asked the question about taxes. If the board doesn't levy an impact fee, will you be forced to raise taxes on the citizens of Sarasota County? Our answer to that question was no, you couldn't do that if you wanted to, and what we talked about is what you'd be forced to do is talk about competing interests. If you don't have an impact fee, what are the other options? That then led to maybe the second big theme is to the extent that you use ad valorem or sales tax dollars to pay for growth, growth then becomes a competing interest for those dollars and competing with school buses and technology and facilities maintenance, all those other kinds of things that we use capital on. So part of what we heard in the North County meeting is minimize the impact on ad valorem because there's a whole lot of other things you could be using with those dollars if you used impact fees or borrowing or something like that. So those were kind of the big.
I just want to clarify, you said we can't raise taxes, and at this point we can't. The legislature sets the capital millage at 1.5.
That's right.
A few years ago, it was 1.75 and 2.0, and then they reduced the amount of capital and increased the amount we could do in operating. There is legislative requests from, I think, the School Board Association or the consortium, because several school districts around the state are having problems because they had borrowed money and they're in a bind because they don't have enough. They can't raise enough money to even cover those bonds.
Right.
I don't know that in the future we would even consider it, but the legislature might give the district the opportunity to do that. But I mean, to say that it's absolutely off the table, today it is.
Right.
Don't know about tomorrow. The legislature could vote to raise taxes, right, Frank? Tallahassee could freeze over.
Sure.
It has done that in the past. Just to clarify. But
no, I appreciate that. So what we've included in kind of the base revenue stream is 1.5 mils assessed against a growing, in our examples here, tax roll base value, and then the quarter penny sales tax. That's what's in your revenue stream today. And then as we talk about the options or the examples, we've added borrowing and or impact fees to those scenarios. The other thing that we included in the read ahead is the drafts of the final reports on both growth management and impact fees from Tyndall Oliver. Kathy and I both had an opportunity to look through those, and there were no surprises. I think they were kind of a narrative of what you heard in their presentation, so I didn't see any new information. That was just kind of the final draft reports. Before we talked about scenarios, I wanted to talk about common language, and going back to Caroline's question earlier, we do use some terms in each of our scenarios, so I just wanted to make sure we all have the same understanding of what those terms mean. On the revenue side, we talk about sales tax and 1.5 mils, and you know that is kind of your common baseline of revenue source on the capital side of the budget. That is the 1.5 mils that you levy against the tax roll base plus the quarter penny sales tax. That's what's in that piece of the scenarios.
And the quarter penny is in that 7th cent that we have in Sarasota County. So
correct. And so you know, we stopped at the 10-year point. I think the quarter penny sales tax right now expires in 2024. Our assumptions beyond the 10th year would be that the county would go back to the voters and look to continue to assess that quarter point. So when we went beyond 10 years, we assumed that sales tax revenue was still there. Impact fees. Impact fees, as you've heard before, are a one-time charge to help development pay for the cost of development. The impact fee is assessed against an individual home. The maximum impact fee that is in your recommendation is $7,835 per home. That money can only be used to pay for growth. So we can't use it to do maintenance of existing schools. We used impact fees for things like Woodland Middle School, Atwater Elementary School. But they must be used to pay, assessed for growth. They must be used to pay for growth. So did I answer your question in a meaningful way with that?
To pay for growth in the new areas. It's like
the term is new capacity.
Yes.
The official definition of impact fees is to add new capacity. So new capacity is a transportation system, is new buses, is a wing on an existing school if it is adding capacity to the school. So it is
as a result of building.
It's new capacity. It means that because so let's say Wilkinson, it's the first school that comes to my head. It's clearly not in a growth corridor.
Correct.
But if we were adding capacity to Wilkinson and we therefore were redistricting other schools to alleviate growth pressures from elsewhere, we could use impact fees. It's new capacity. It's capacity exceeding what you have today. So it's not necessary. I don't want you to think that you couldn't put it in an existing school. You could. You just have to make sure that it meets that definition of new capacity, not capacity you have in some way today, but additional capacity above and beyond what you have today. It's very clear in the statute that that's what it has to be used for.
And I think I heard your follow-up question to respond to growth. You're right. So, for example, if we were going to put a wing at Gosio Elementary School because we have 25 portables at Gosio, you couldn't use impact fees for that.
That's what I wanted.
Because that's adding capacity, but it's not responding to growth. It's to deal with current kids. So.
Thank you.
And if we collect it and we don't use it, what is the delimiter there?
7 years.
7 years.
Mm-hmm. You have 7 years to spend the money.
Mm-hmm.
After the 7th year, you have to look at retribution back to whoever it was that paid for that development, that capacity you're not paying for, or you're not spending.
And they pay for this. This fee is paid if there is an impact fee. When?
At the time of CO. So they pay for it at the very end of the development process.
Now, other terms that we use, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, we talk about borrowing in a couple of scenarios. We assumed that borrowing meant COPS, that the board would issue certificates of participation like we did for Venice and SCTI and to some extent Atwater. We assumed that the payback period for those certificates would be 20 years. Of course, your debt service payment goes up as that time frame gets shorter, but we assumed a 20-year payback. We talked a bit about, please.
Could you also take a moment and talk about the board's policy as opposed to the state's policy in the maximum amount of COPS while you're on that subject right now?
You bet, and I'll oversimplify it a little bit. The state says that you can't spend more than 75% of your ad valorem revenue to pay back debt. The school board has set a policy that says no more than 50%. So we take the value of the tax roll base, we assume 95% collections, multiply that number times 0.75, and that's the maximum amount of money that you can spend to pay back debt. The board has said multiply times 0.5 or half of that revenue. And none of these scenarios take you beyond that policy.
I just wanted it to be clear to the public that our rate as ratio is lower than what the state is requiring, and that we borrow less than the state will allow us to.
Sure, and I think lower is defined as fiscally responsible. You're conservative with your borrowing, yes. We talk a little bit about projects. One of the scenarios talks about projects. If you decided not to borrow or levy an impact fee, could you still pay for growth? And so what projects is defined, if you think about the 10-year period as 2 blocks, in the first 5 years we said, okay, we'll remove essentially all of the competing projects because they're defined in the current 5-year CIP. In the second 5 years, we actually have a line item in the budget for competing projects, but there's no specific project tied to that dollar amount. So what we did is reduce the amount of money that was set aside for competing projects just to make the budget balance. Does that make sense? Okay. And then finally, growth costs. Growth costs will be based on a couple of things. We looked at $10 projection of when we'll need schools. That was our timeline, and we'll talk more about that in a second. We then took the current cost of building a school. We inflated that at 3% a year for each of the years. So a school that cost $80 million today is going to cost $100 million in 2024. So. I said before that they're not options, they're examples. They're really an infinite number, and I meant to say this later, but I'll say it now. If you think about each of the things that you have available to you as a valve, so you have the competing projects valve, you have the borrowing valve, and you have the impact fee valve, and you can open those valves to let the dollars in this case flow at the rate that you want. So the more you open the borrowing valve, the less you have to open the other. And so the reason I say there's really an infinite number of possibilities is because it depends on how far you want to open any one or those or combination of those 3 valves. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. We've presented 3 scenarios. Status quo simply says that we're not going to change anything, and you'll see that doesn't work. We can't pay for growth under the status quo scenario. We've included one that says projects. I already touched on that a little bit. We essentially eliminate. We don't borrow any money. We don't assess an impact fee. We pay for growth by both eliminating pretty much all the projects in your current CIP and then taking money out of years 6, 7, 8, and 9 to make the budget balance. We have a scenario that relies on borrowing. It assumes no impact fee, no change in the current CIP. So you pay for growth and make the budget balance by borrowing. And you can see the numbers in there. We borrow about $143 million in addition to your current debt service in that scenario. We built a scenario that says you assume a full impact fee, $7,835 per home. There's still a little bit of borrowing in that scenario, you'll see, and part of it is just because you don't generate enough impact fee money early enough to pay for the first school. But you can see how that scenario plays out. At its full level in the first 10 years, you generate about $168.5 million of revenue over the 10-year period. And then we include one of what could be an infinite number of possibilities that we've called a hybrid, where we use a little bit of each of these. We don't eliminate any projects, but there's a balance of borrowing and impact fee. And again, which of those you do kind of depends on how far you open any one of those valves. What else did I want to say about that? The last thing I want to talk about before we look specifically at the scenarios is just be real transparent about where we are with enrollment. What are we seeing happening in our schools today as compared to what some of the projections say? This part of the read ahead, Mr. Widener wrote, I took it right out of some things he did relative to looking at 2014 enrollment compared to 2015 and then his projection compared to 2015. But what you see is at the elementary schools and the middle schools, enrollment as compared, his projection for October as compared to 2014 is down very marginally, literally about a classroom across the district. 20, you can see the numbers there, 27 students at the elementary level and 20 at the middle school level. A fairly significant uptick in high school, 316 more students than October of 2014. And then I included the district numbers there just so you can see them in the aggregate that we project to be up in October by 268 students.
And if you look at where we were a few years ago, that was the dead bottom of the recession. So a lot of people moved away. And so I think that has impacted our kindergarten and first graders this year.
You can, and the other thing, too, is, and we've talked about this a lot, if you think about where we are in the development cycle, as we drive around this community, you see that we are poised for development in a lot of places, but what you're seeing is the moving of a lot of dirt and some rooftops beginning to appear, but we're early enough, I think, in the development process where you're not seeing lots of families yet have moved in. So as we talk about this, we would suggest to the board that in terms of how you build your plan, build it with an eye towards the way Tyndall Oliver has helped us build this projections. Assume that this development is going to happen and the kids are going to come. It just seems like kind of the conservative approach. And so what I would say is we watch what happens with enrollment the rest of this year. We look at next year's 5-day count and we ask ourselves, has what we thought would happen really happened? Because if not, you just take the entire plan, you push it to the right a year. So it's not catastrophic. You just move the problem to the right.
Just for the record, Kathy Iba, Director of Planning. The other thing to remember is when we do our student generation rates, we are assuming an equal distribution of students. So, and that never happens, right? So, if we project 100 new students this year, we're going to divide that by 13 and equally distribute them across the grades. That's a guess on our part. It's just the best methodology we have. But it's really actually looking at the data on a continuous basis to understand how that is actually happening. So that we're having more at the high school level than we expected, that just is the way things work out sometimes. And planning is at best a undefinable science.
One of the things that concerns me is that nowhere in here are charter schools. How do charter schools come into play in this forecasting that we're doing?
Sure. So and Kathy, if I get any of this wrong, feel free to chime in. So that from an enrollment projections perspective, what we did is first pull out all the kids who are in charter schools today and then assume that the ratio of kids charter to traditional schools stays the same. So what we're looking at is essentially the COFTI number, the number of kids that you as the School Board of Sarasota County are responsible to house.
It actually increased 2%.
Did it?
Yeah, we increased it 2% to 15%, okay. and then we stayed at 15% throughout the duration of the study.
That was my other concern, because everything is projected on capacity and not fish. Are we able to use capacity instead of fish, or do we have to use the state-approved fish?
That's a really good question, and our adopted level of service standard, and defining a level of service standard, that means the amount of service that we have established that we will provide for the Sarasota County community in education. So we have an adopted level of service standard that is based on permanent program capacity. We're going to have this discussion probably in the next couple months, maybe at the November meeting, as we continue through this discussion. But we are internally right now evaluating whether we stay with our current level of service standard adopted at permanent program, or if we move to the state standard, so to speak, at FISH. We are the only county that has adopted level of service standard as permanent program. Every other county has adopted a FISH capacity, but you can still get there regardless of whether you use permanent program or fish. It's just about how you determine what percentage of fish. So, for example, we've already had some consultants our consultants, Tyndall Oliver, have looked at if you kept the exact same level of service standard but you moved it to fish, what you would do is you would say rather than 100% of fish capacity at the elementary school level, you'd go to 85% capacity. If rather than doing 100% at the middle school level, you go to 90% middle school, and 100% high school, you go to 95% capacity. So at 85%, 90%, and 95%, fish capacity is the same as evaluating at program capacity. It's a discussion for another day, but the point is we evaluate it on permanent program because that's our current level of service standard, but even if we move to a fish capacity, we can get there and we can be apples to apples.
One other question, if I might, and that is, oh gosh, it can't go away.
It'll come back to you.
No, here it is. We have space. We have open space in some schools and not in other areas.
That's right.
I personally don't want to see us change boundaries because I've lived through a few of those, and they're not pretty. But how will the state be in allowing us to build when we still have capacity at some of our schools?
That's a really important question, especially as
That's 3 in a row.
That's
Get a star.
You're on a roll today. And we had this discussion at the August meeting when we had Tyndall Alver, and by the way, they will be at this evening's meeting, so if you have any specific questions that you want to ask them, they'll be here this evening. But when we had that discussion, it especially affects the middle school level, because it is at the middle school level that that question of redistribution of students comes up. We have, overall, at the middle school level, we have capacity, and it's in their study. You can look at it. Overall, at the middle school level, we have capacity without building a new school. All of the 5 examples that we provided you today include the addition of a new middle school in the latter years. And we did that because the only way to utilize the capacity at the middle school level is through a district-wide redistricting of the middle schools. The capacity is at the ends of this county, so they're at the north end, they're at the south end, and in the middle, which is also where we're getting most of our growth, we are already either over capacity or near to tightness of capacity. So because our current boundaries are based on the student attendance zone for that school, again, this is part of our adopted level of service standard. We have adopted a service capacity that is based on student attendance boundaries for that school. The state would accept us building schools where we need them rather than looking at redistricting. Now, if we did, I'm going to use an example because it's been in the news. Manatee County, as most people know, is doing a similar study to what we've done. Their student attendance boundaries are countywide, so they would have to look at that redistricting before we would because of the way we've driven our boundaries. Now, if you change your student attendance zones and you went to more of a countywide district, that would be a different question. But today, based on your today's adopted level of service standard, you would not be required to redistrict the whole county to address that middle school capacity issue, because it's a locational problem. It's not a countywide problem.
Okay, it's different than when we were trying to build Northport High, because they wouldn't allow us to build Northport High because we had capacity in Booker.
Yeah.
So I remember that. So
Yeah.
I just want to be really clear on what it is that we're doing.
The other thing that I would share with you, if you think about the first school, we've called it North Venice area because we don't know where it would be, but we think that's where you'll have the demand first. Think about where we are right now today. We've got 18 portables full of kids at Garden Elementary School. So you've already started to build the case that you're going to need a new elementary school in that part of the county. So that will get worse before you'll get approval to build, worse in terms of the number of portables, but you're already well on your way.
And the locational, that concern that you have really only exists at the middle school level. If you look at the elementary level, you look at the high school level, the overall capacity in the district is much, much more minimized. At the high school level and at the elementary level, it's a lot tighter across the district. That question only comes up with the middle schools. And, unless you want to look at redistricting the entire county, we would recommend that we look at adding a new middle school to address the locational problems that exist or will exist today and will only get worse as development comes online.
I just want to comment on my face that I made. It's because I've lived through the horrors of redistricting, and it really is a horror. I mean, you can't satisfy anyone, and I understand everybody takes ownership of their school and doesn't want to leave it. And so.
Lori and Scott asked Mickey and I, as part of this assessment after the August meeting when we identified that we had a locational issue at the middle school level, and we determined that the only way to address that problem is through a district-wide redistricting. And we presented a few scenarios to the two of them, and they both looked at us and said, "No, let's put in the middle school." It would not be a pretty redistricting.
If I can take everybody's attention, let's go to the first tab, and I just want to quickly go through these tabs so you know what our examples or scenarios look like. Tab number 1 is really what I would call the problem statement. What you see here is essentially when we would recommend that we think about buying either property or funding schools. The colors in this spreadsheet are important too. The green on each line is essentially the year that a school would open. The reason that's important is because, for example, on that first kind of northwesternmost or top leftmost, you see North Venice Area Elementary School construction. If you wanted the school to open in 2018, we would have to fund it in 2016 next year. That would be our design year. We would build in 2017. So just know that there's a lag between when you need the school and when you need the money. And then you can see across the spreadsheet, we've got 4 elementary schools funded and opened. We have a high school funded and open. And then in the 10-year period, we fund a middle school, but it doesn't open until 2028. So if you add all that up and you inflate it, there's about $325 million worth of property purchase, design, and construction. Shirley?
One thing that's not in here is the build out at Venice High, and I understand Venice High is at capacity now, but we planned that we could add another 400 students. If the growth is coming there, why wouldn't we just add that wing?
That's absolutely what would be our first step. We would add that wing. On a per-student station cost, it would be much, much, much cheaper than building a new school. What that does, assuming that the growth happens in the Venice High School attendance zone, is it pushes the need for a second high school out. It delays the need to do that if the growth happens in the Venice attendance.
Oh, but it's not included in this plan.
No.
So if that means that that $120 million could be pushed out past 10 years?
No, it wouldn't be.
We'd have to have something for those. There'd be a difference.
Yeah, it's only a 400 student station wing, so it would push it out. It would push it out a little bit. And then
right.
one of the reasons
it would delay your need for a second school. Yes.
One of the reasons,
but we'd still have to spend the money for that build out. And
right.
What would that be?
$40,000 times 400, roughly. What is that? I always get the zeros mixed up. 40 million. Is that? Say it again.
16 million.
$16 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you do it, it'd probably cost 20.
There's also another reason that we didn't bring that up, and that's because we are still evaluating the students who live in what is right now the Lemon Bay high school attendance zone, which is Charlotte County. And so as we evaluate what those students were not included in this study because they're in a different attendance zone that's associated with Charlotte County. But as we evaluate that a student attendance zone, it may change things. So that's another reason that we purposely did not look at that additional wing at Venice High School, because there may be other reasons for it. There may be other uses for it.
I'm
But I really, I have a problem with our students going to Charlotte County schools, only because a few years ago there was not a great deal of difference between the two school districts in terms of academic standing. There's becoming a wider and wider difference between us and Charlotte, and there's some play by paying sports issues and other things. So I'm hearing from parents now who do not want to be zoned and have to go to Lemon Bay, and they say, hey, I'm paying Sarasota County taxes and the $1 million for the referendum, and why can't I go to Venice High School? So that's an issue. I know we're establishing our interlocal agreement today at our board meeting, but still and again, I have a problem with that.
So do I, because I'm having the same parents that are coming to me, and I can't say to them that they're wrong, because they are paying Sarasota taxes and they are paying referendum. And how can I tell them that's just too bad, you have to go to Charlotte County? I mean, it's not fair.
It's a bit off topic, but just kind of a peek under the tent, because Kathy and Lori and I have all talked about this. And I've talked to my counterpart in Charlotte County at length about this too. What we've talked about doing is starting off, we're going to have a staff meeting between the two staffs, but starting off very early with having some community meetings with parents whose kids go to those schools. Englewood Elementary, LA Angel, Lemon Bay, have some town meetings in those schools, invite those parents in and say, what do you want? Because I guess it's almost a two-sided coin. On the one side, if I live in Englewood, my neighborhood high school is Lemon Bay. I can walk. I mean, it's right there. Venice High is a long ways away. On the other hand, I say, particularly if my daughter plays volleyball, I want to go to Venice High. I'm being a little silly, but I mean, so I think part of what we owe you is knowing what the parents down there really expect. Because if they're comfortable, if they say, Ainger and Lemon Bay are my community schools, then how do we respond to that? If they say, we pay Sarasota taxes and we want to go to Venice High, how do we respond to that too? But I think the whole thing starts with a community conversation with moms and dads about what do they want.
But the whole point of this discussion is that those students are not included in our existing study, and that's why we purposely did not look at that wing at Venice High School, because we're not sure how that wing is going to be utilized. If it's going to be used for growth or it's going to be used for expansion of the district.
Kind of trailing back to this, the summary of costs, I want this addressed because this is something that was brought up to me in the community, and was the cost of construction. If you can kind of address how we came to that, because we have the elementary schools at different rates, and then obviously we know it costs much more to build a high school.
Sure.
And I also think the comparison, this was brought up to me, that's why I want you to address it, was I know people are aware of the cost of STC South County being built and that being a $15 million project, which I know we're also doing in conjunction with the county for the library. But if you can just address how we're coming up with those costs, because I think the cost of construction is a huge element of us
sure, maybe
discussing this.
Maybe I respond to that in two ways. Let me talk just kind of purely about how we came up with the cost and then kind of a why. What we did is we looked at our most recent projects. So, for example, we looked at the elementary level, we looked at Atwater Elementary School. We said, what did it cost us to build Atwater Elementary School? When did we do it? How has the cost of construction changed from then and today? So that established our baseline. And then I said, okay, if collectively we said, okay, then as you move from today forward, the baseline is today, we'll inflate the cost of construction at 5%. So what that $28,119,000 in 2016 represents for that first elementary school is essentially Atwater's cost per square foot inflated to 2016. Does that kind of make sense? And something similar to with both the middle schools and the high schools. If you compare our cost of buildings to some surrounding districts, you'll see that our schools are a bit more expensive on a per student station cost basis, and that's on purpose. We do some things at the front end that we think hold down the cost of operation over the life of the school. And I'll give you again, we're off topic a little, but I'll give you one or two examples. Thermal storage. We put thermal storage as part of our air conditioning systems at all of our schools today. Dramatic savings on your electric bill from the day you open. Dramatic. And if you wanted some data, I could give it to you. The second thing that I would point out is if you look at both Venice and Booker high schools, they have brick exteriors. There is an up cost of putting brick in a tilt wall. But this is the year when we're going to paint Riverview High. I don't know what that's going to cost yet, but I'm guessing on the $200,000 range. And if you do that every 7 years, all of a sudden the cost of that upcharge of brick becomes smart business. Yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question, but okay. Right.
You weren't on the board, and I think I had just gotten on when we were building Riverview High, and there was a lot of talk about the costs involved in that. And we came up with ed specs for our middle elementary and high schools, and I'm sure we could get you a copy of those that talk about how we're going to, and whether or not we do it cheap today or to cost saving in the long run. And another thing that we have to do, we've got those building specs in there about cost savings, but we also have to build our schools according to the Florida standards to last 50 years. I know like charter schools and some other buildings, they only have to build them for 25 years. But we have to come ours up to 50 years. And we also have to have hurricane evacuation built in to our schools. So our costs are a little higher than general out there, which helps it. And then, of course, this difference in sizes from the middle of the elementary and high school would account for a lot of it. But you figured out about $1 per student station on each of those.
Just so the board, so the public knows, particularly as it relates to hurricane shelters, whatever the additional cost is for that, the county helps us with too. The school board doesn't board the cost of that. So, any other questions on the problem statement? All I wanted you to see is kind of the years in which we plan to do things and what the total cost was.
Scott, can I interject on that one just for a second? Just for the public's purpose, because, Bridget, that's where you were going. The analysis that Scott just did, I kind of pushed it over to him. It is part of the growth. It's part of the second report that Tyndall Oliver produced for us. So all of that assessment and all of that analysis is in the report on page B2. So it's the second part of the report. So that assessment, that analysis is public.
So if you go to tab 2, what we tried to do here is just summarize the options that we're going to present based on where the money would come from. And we don't need to belabor this too much because you'll see these again on each one of the scenarios or options. But what we try to do is color code the revenue source. So the blue bar, and this will repeat on each of the scenarios, is essentially the cost. Anything yellow is coming from ad valorem or sales tax. I think one of the things you'll hear at public hearing tonight is that growth becomes a competing interest. So every dollar you spend in that yellow bar there is a dollar that's not available for buying buses or technology or maintenance of schools, and that is true. Growth is a competing interest, and you can see how much of it you're using there. Green is the project reduction value. Purple is borrowing, and then that kind of rust color is impact fees. And that will repeat throughout the scenarios. So we'll hit on these very quickly. Go to tab 3. This is the first scenario. It's the status quo scenario. And what we're going to do here, I think, is I'll take a little bit more time on scenario 1 just to orient everybody what you're looking at. But I'll talk about the top half, and Kathy will talk about the bottom half of each one of these pieces of paper. But what we've done on the top half here is given you a 10-year snapshot of your budget. The top line is appropriation. You'll see that that's pretty fixed between the scenarios, with the exception of the one where we take projects out, because obviously appropriation goes down if you take money out of competing projects. The next line down is carry forward, or it's essentially the balance from the previous year. And then there's a line that says revenue. And what we've done with revenue is where we have either borrowed or used an impact fee, it's included in that revenue line. And we have removed from the revenue line your carry forward and your transfers and debt service, because we saw that as something that's not available as a tool for you. You got to pay your debt. So we took that out of the revenue. The color-coded lines right underneath essentially tried to capture the problem statement that was in tab 1. So the kind of orange boxes is the year in which we would plan or fund the school. Yellow would be construction years, and then green would be the year it opens. So you can kind of see where the construction is happening relative to the budget.
I understand that we needed to be conservative with these numbers. But, I think we're under on our tax base increase. Of course, we may be under on the cost of construction, too.
Right.
But to assume that in years 6 to 10 there's only a 4% growth when, there's a lot of that holdback of that 3%, of the homesteaded properties that can increase by 3% a year. And I know I have still some left of appreciation that my taxes are going to increase 3% a year. So any growth would be adding to that, and I know that there might be another downturn, but, I'm kind of Pollyanna-ish, and I don't think it's going to happen in the next 10 years, but it could. But I understand that you need to be conservative in those numbers, but, I think they're a little too conservative.
And what we actually had some conversation between your budget department and our consultants about where we ought to land, and where we ultimately landed is we'll use 6% growth for the next 5 years and 4% after that.
And we were at 7.9 this year.
We were. I guess personally I'm kind of ultra conservative about that kind of stuff, but can you really sustain a 6% growth over a 10-year period? I don't know. And our consultants actually balked at the number originally, because I think Al had it 6% throughout the entire time frame. And what happens is it compounds, and so the revenue side of your budget gets to some really big numbers really fast. And we said, gosh, is this really realistic? Can you sustain 6% for 10 years? And so we didn't. In our assumptions, we used 6% through 24-25, and then rolled back to 4%.
And by the way, our consultants were more conservative. I think they were at 4% throughout from the beginning. And where we ended up going is actually in line with the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue is projecting 6% for the first piece, and then moving to 4%. And since
it's easier to budget when you have more money coming in than you expected than less. So I'm going to take your numbers at face value, but knowing they're very conservative.
Well, and we could be, as you say, we could be conservative also on our cost side. So. I think in general, Tyndall Oliver has been more prudent than more expeditious. and that's probably a good place for us to be because we'd certainly like to have more to play with long term than less.
Kathy, anything you want to say about the assumptions, key points, pros and cons?
Well, the big assumption was the one we've just talked about, that we're at 6% tax roll base increase for 6 years, and then after that we go to 4%. Then the other big point on this one is the fact that taxes alone, leaving us where we are today, depending on our existing tax roll base, is not going to cover it. This is the only scenario that we showed you that does not provide for the balance of the books. And we did that on purpose because we wanted people to understand that there are, Scott talked about the 3 other juggling that you're going to have to do, and somewhere you're going to have to make some decisions, whether it's on the borrowing side, whether it's on the impact fee side or additional revenue side. Something else has to happen besides just depending on our existing tax roll base.
So if you turn the page, the next scenario is the one where we have said we assume you don't borrow, you don't levy an impact fee. We do all this within our existing budget. The only way to make that happen is by the elimination or reduction of competing projects. That's what that kind of light green is in the bar off to the left. You'll notice in this scenario, first thing you'll notice is the appropriation numbers go down pretty dramatically in every year except 2017. That's the year in which we would pay for the first elementary school. There is no scenario in which you could fund an elementary school in 2016 without borrowing. There is no revenue source. Even at 100%, impact fee doesn't get you there in 2 years or in a year. And if we eliminate all of our projects, you still don't have enough revenue left to build a school. So what we've done here is eliminate the projects and push that elementary school to the right a year, just because that's as soon as we could get to the money. Everything else is the same.
The big significant component here from a planning perspective is that in taking away projects like Goshio and Garden Elementary, which are putting in wings and replacing existing portables, that's going to hurt us long term because we need those portables to help us manage the growth. Our goal in establishing those wings and building those wings is that would free up our portable inventory to move them to the areas that we need new schools. If we don't do those wings and we leave those schools with their portables, that means that we're going to have to address the portable question and for the growth question in other ways. We're going to have to lease them, we're going to have to purchase them, and neither one of those are cheap options, which we haven't completely calculated those additional costs into these scenarios. So understand that if we take away these projects, we're not completely understanding the cost because we're going to have to do something else with portables.
Scenario 3, which is at tab 5, this is a scenario that says we don't eliminate competing projects, and we also don't levy an impact fee. Can you make all this happen just by borrowing? Yes, you can. You can see that happens. That the purple piece of that bar is borrowing revenue. So what we've built in here is 3 times during this period where you would borrow for a total of $143 million of additional debt service.
One thing I had asked you yesterday was that it's difficult to make any decision on borrowing without looking at that long term. And, do you have those numbers for us? I know you had some chart yesterday that you were looking at.
Well, part of what you and I think we talked about yesterday is, if I understood what you were asking us, is if you look at the amount of money that's being generated on the revenue side because of development, because of growth, what does that get you?
Well, there was 2 questions. The one of them is the borrowing amount. What is our capacity to even borrow? And you had a nice, colorful handout for us. You didn't give it to me yesterday, but you said you'd have it today.
Talk about this one?
That's the one.
Well, and Bridget asked about this, too. Have you seen this? Okay. Bridget actually asked for this, and so that's kind of why we built it. This wasn't in the read-ahead because it kind of happened after the fact, but...
You're going to have to share.
I think I have enough.
Oh, do you?
I hope so.
We have a copy machine back in the office.
The board gives us such a tight budget that we can't afford the paper to put in the copy machine, though. Lori, if I can talk from this, I'll give you my copy when we're finished. So what we tried to do here is just kind of in a picture show you what revenue looks like. So this is the scenario that says you don't levy an impact fee, all you do is borrow. And what we try to do is stack the debt service on top of itself so you can see what it looks like. So start at the far left. We've included the 3 COPs that are out there now. They funded Booker High, Venice High, and then the combination of the North County Technical Center, Technical College, and Atwater. So you can kind of see them stacked. And then you can see when they retire. So the first one retires June of 2024. The next one, June of 2025. The next one, June of 2027. So when you look at when you would levy new debt, the next elementary school would be next year, assuming that the enrollment really showed up. And there would be some overlap there. You wouldn't borrow again until 2022, so your payment would be due first in 2023, and that's the year in which you have 5 certificates all stacked on each other, but it's only for 1 year. And it stays well within your 50% debt service policy. So, and I'm not advocating this at all. I'm just kind of showing you what the numbers say. So you would have 1 year where you would have 5 certificates stacked on top of each other. The Atwater one would expire the very next year. The Venice High one would expire the year following that. And then kind of long term, you end up fairly quickly with just the debt associated with today's conversation. That is the first elementary school, the first high school, and then the first middle school. So you kind of see at least pictorially what it looks like.
So you're saying the high amount would be that $22 million?
Yes.
And our revenue in that area would be at least $44 million.
Oh, gosh, do you mean total revenue?
Well, at least it would be at least 60, 75, 80.
It's well beyond that. If you're talking about total revenue, I could go back and look at the budget, but it's 100. It's in the. It's
171 million.
Yeah, so if you look in the scenario, it's 171 million, and that's after we've taken out debt service and transfers.
So we'd have 171 million. So this 22 would definitely be within our.
Well within.
Okay.
Yes, well within. We also looked, Shirley, you asked yesterday, while we're on this topic, you asked yesterday if you estimate what new development will do to the ad valorem taxes, and you said let's use some of that to pay for debt. Al and I talked about that last night, and what he has said is over the 10-year period, new development will generate about $79 million worth of revenue, just new development. And if you look at the debt service payment associated with what's going to happen in that first 10 years, so you'd have 9 years of the first elementary school, and then you have about 3 years of the first high school, you couldn't spend all that money on debt. You just can't get there. If you figure your debt service is about $2 million a year on the elementary school, that would be $18 million over that 9 years. Figure it to be about double that on the high school, so another $18 million over 3 years. So you're spending $36 million worth of debt in that 10-year period, and you're generating $80 million just on new construction. So where did that leave us? Sure, no, thanks. Well, your idea. So credit for that goes to Bridget. It was her idea.
So leads us to.
So that was scenario 3. Kathy did. I don't know where.
Scenario 3 is pretty self-explanatory. We have no assessment, but we end up mortgaging the future.
Right. Not only of your budget, but of the next board. Scenario 4 is one where we say we're not going to borrow any money, but we're going to levy an impact fee at 100%. As it turns out, you can't. I said earlier, you can't make that happen without some borrowing, because if the first school needs to be funded next year, even at 100%, an impact fee doesn't generate enough fund balance to build a school. So you'll notice that even in this scenario, we borrowed $14 million to get that first school under contract, and then the rest is paid for without debt, but 100% of your impact fee, which would generate over the 10 years about $168 million.
And Shirley, yesterday you asked us at the 100% scenario, you asked if we had looked at the other levels besides 100, because the two that we presented in here are the current level, which is about 26%, and the 100%. Because this was just meant for examples, we figured that you all could kind of think about, well, what would be the different scenarios. But we did the calculations on the various ones, so I'm going to hand those out. Again, we didn't put this in the read head because it was a question that Shirley asked of us yesterday. And if the public wants them, there's some extras in the back. But
when you give Lori her copy, give her that too.
Okay.
cold. Are you?
So again, because these are examples and not necessarily, we aren't asking you to make a determination on any one of these. We could have done infinite number of scenarios. We stopped at 5. Thought that was good enough for the discussion point. But if you wanted to amend these, and that's why I'm looking at 100% impact fees with borrowing. If you wanted to look at what 75% would be, then you'd see that 75 over the long term would get you about $126 million. It means that you could have more. It gives you other options. What do you do with the borrowing? Do you decrease the borrowing? Do you decrease the amount of tax base you're using? These are all options that are on the table for you for discussion point. We have no preference for this. This is your determination on how you're going to use, kind of as Scott said, the different valves. Which one gets more, which one gets less. Our only concern is that we end up at a balanced budget at the end. So,
one of the things that's interesting about this scenario 4, is if you look at the fund balance line that we've labeled here, net over under. You can actually watch the line on the bottom says impact fees. You can see how much impact fee we're generating each year, but then look at what it does to your fund balance. So you can watch the fund balance build pretty dramatically over time. You get out to 2022 where it's time to build a school. You have a fund balance that's big enough to do that, and then you can see the fund balance go down pretty significantly. That's because we have built both the high school and an elementary school. So you can actually see how the fund balance is impacted by the collection of those fees.
And remember, again, the study that Tyndall Oliver did for us takes us to 2040, which is akin to what the MPO did with their transportation plan. We're only showing out through 2025 because we think at that point it kind of gets fuzzy, but there were additional schools in the study that go beyond this. So we wouldn't want to think that, okay, at 2025 we're done. Right. The study says that we would have additional planning. In fact, there's an elementary school that I think happens about 2 years, 2027, 2 years after this, that's right on the horizon.
And then the last scenario 5 is at tab 7. This is kind of the last of the scenarios that we wanted to show you. We called this a hybrid model, and again, there are literally infinite number of these, and I'll tell you why we picked this one in a second. But what this does is say, what if you lean a little bit on borrowing and a little bit on impact fee? You do something less than 100% of any one of those, and again, you can push on any of those valves. Part of the reason that we chose to use the one that says you just let the moratorium sunset is, as we were looking at that sheet that Kathy just handed out, 25, 50, and 75, we looked at the 25% number and said, gosh, this is almost exactly what's in moratorium today. So if the board were to do nothing and the current moratorium were to sunset, it's actually 25.9% of the current of the total maximum here, $78.35 per household. So the reason we did that is just because it was essentially the same as the 25% scenario in terms of the math.
And what that means for you, we've talked to the county attorney to understand what that would mean for you in terms of what your actions are. It means there is no action. The October 20th meeting, we can have a discussion. You can tell us we're going to take no action. We inform the county that we're taking no action, and the moratorium sunsets. The impact fee ordinance that's on the books today that is currently under moratorium is reinstated, and we go back to business as usual. We're not necessarily recommending. We just want you to understand that that's what it means for you.
So that's probably more than you ever wanted to hear about funding options, but what?
If the board chose to any of those scenarios where impact fee would come again, when would they actually start collecting impact fees, and when would the revenue start coming in?
You're at all good questions today, board. The answer is if you go anything above where we are today, so if the 2032 where we are today.
Anything other than, because if they went down to,
no.
If they wanted to change it.
But wait.
Go ahead.
If you go anything other than 2032, it would start being collected immediately. For the first 3 months, because there's a 90-day public information period, for the first 90 days it goes to 2032. At the 90-day mark, it goes up to wherever you're setting it at the new level. So if you go to 25, the first 90 days are where we are today, and then it goes up. If it goes down, we would collect at that 2032 and then adjust. So we have that adjustment period. But what I think Scott was going to say, if you do anything other than where we are today, you need to make a board action that recommends to the Board of County Commissioners that they adopt an impact fee at whatever level you're going to state. And legally, we can establish it at anything up to the maximum of 78. So that's kind of where we stand with it.
But the rest of my question was, so then whatever the date is, then is that any permit that's pulled after that date? Or
That's right.
is that any CO that's
Any
issued after?
any CO that's done after that.
So this would be retroactive then?
Well,
If it's
because
CO, because there'd be houses under construction at that time.
again, we go. I mean, I don't think of it as retroactive. I think of it as where
Well, if
we.
you pulled your permit and your house is under construction, and then you're saying CO or permit, that's 9 months or a year or 2 years even sometimes on what that window is.
I mean, you could think of it that way. I look at it as it's by ordinance we pull at CO. So once. If you, up until the point, we're not going to go backwards and collect something on someone who's pulled a CO the day before it reinstates. It's from that day of reinstatement, and it's clear in our ordinance when we have currently asked for a moratorium until. So if you're pulling a permit right now and you're in that gray horizon, if you've done your due diligence, you realize that we have a sunset currently, and that you may be susceptible to a school impact fee if you end up pulling your CO after the date of our sunset, if we've reestablished it.
Anything else?
Before you adjourn, Chair, if there is anything else, I guess what we'd like to know from you is what else do you need? If we talk about this again in October, for example, are there other scenarios you'd like us to look at? Is there data or information that we haven't provided you that you need? What else can we do to help you kind of in this decision? I guess, number one, how we pay for growth, and ultimately, from a board action, do you do anything proactively with impact fees? What else can we do for you?
Well, I talked to you yesterday and told you I don't like any of your scenarios.
I'm married to somebody very much like you. Who's probably watching on TV, and I'll be eating on a TV tray.
Yes. It's like the husband the wife who wanted something that went from 0 to 200 in 6 seconds, and couldn't understand, why the wife threw him out when he gave her a scale instead of her car. I would like to see some, because impact fees are supposed to pay for growth, but there's also, it's not just the impact fees that they pay that bring revenue into us, because I think we also ought to incorporate that increased taxes that they're going to give us. And I know some taxes pay for the maintenance of the schools, but to me it's like the impact fees is the down payment and should be a substantial down payment. And then I found that when we borrowed the money that it was a good investment, because we were able to borrow and build at today's rates and extend it out. Right. So, I would like to see, more of a balance.
So what, just so that we understand.
Maybe a third.
A third.
I'm sorry, I object to this. You haven't had your public hearing yet. There's a statute. No, he's going to give us.
Would you please be quiet, or we're going to.
I'm just saying another scenario I'd like to see.
Fair enough.
And if we could get those numbers.
Fair enough. We can do that.
Yeah, I'd give me those numbers.
When you say a third, you're talking about if we tried to balance
or that
the pieces are impact fee plus borrowing plus ad valorem, try to find a balance there.
Yeah, because it seems stacked one way or another, and I know, like I said, we're getting, in the next 10 years, $79 million.
Yes, I understand.
In new building taxes. So, I'd
If
like to
it's-
see how somehow that would work into the picture.
Yeah, fair enough. So, just thinking about the timeline, we can probably play with some scenarios in relatively short order. What we could do is send them to you just so you could see them, so that everybody can kind of see, and then give us some feedback. Did we come close to? And if not, we can always do additional scenarios.
Maybe look at something like that if you could, or whatever. And I don't
Absolutely.
know how much of a percentage that would be, or maybe another one at how it would rate it at these different. Well, you think that the 26% is you've already pretty much showed us that we do nothing, but what would it look like? The just how much would we have to borrow, and how much out of taxes at these different rates?
So, a good
And
point.
what
So-
those dollars would be if we took these.
Sure. So what we can do is maybe build you, maybe there are kind of four scenarios out there if you look at 50 and 75% of the impact fee, but then the other piece of the equation is you've got a combination of ad valorem and borrowing. So what we could do is, take the borrowing down close to zero and see the impact on ad valorem, but do the opposite too. If you really minimize the impact on your ad valorem taxes and you levy a 50% or 75% of the impact fee, and then you borrow some, you're going to watch the yellow piece of that bar get smaller. So maybe we can show you a couple of different scenarios just so you see how the pieces fit together.
Yeah.
Can I suggest that we'll do those different scenarios, send that out to all board members. If an individual board member wants an additional scenario, make the request individually. Remember, don't have any emails between the board members. Then whatever is requested, we will send out that results to all board members. So that's kind of how we'll get what information, know that whatever is requested will be given to everyone. If you want something, request it directly to Scott, and please don't have conversations in between times between board members, which you all know.
And may I suggest, if we'd like to have a conversation about this, we do have a meeting scheduled on October the 1st. We could always extend that meeting for a half an hour or so and have this discussion. I believe there's enough time for us to be able to do that.
Or we got another workshop time.
We have
That October 1st meeting is kind of iffy at this point.
And gets
yes,
more iffy
that
with
may
the
not.
passing out.
We don't know if that is going to be
Okay.
rescheduled, so I don't think you want to look at that. But there is another workshop.
October 20th.
October 20th. is-
October 20th that
That
we
is
will put on the schedule for any clarification or discussions.
Isn't that the day we vote on it, though?
It is.
It is.
I was trying to avoid that.
I understand. And if the board needs a special meeting, that's also an option. So we'll look for directions.
Could we, on our first meeting in October, could we have a workshop maybe an hour earlier than the 6:30? Start at 5:30 if it's. I'm not saying it's needed, but I'd like some options out there.
We understand that you have a lot of decisions, and that's why we're asking now not for a decision, but for some direction on what other information that's our job, is to give you information. We want to know what other information you want. These new scenarios are good for us to understand, and it won't take us very long. We could have it done by the first week of October. So if you want to schedule a special meeting, or if you want to schedule something on another date, we are happy to provide that information so that you have further ability to ask us questions before you have to make that decision. We understand that having that decision on the same day is really
I need
challenging.
three
Although I would
people,
like
though.
to, I was just going to say, I'd like to have a majority of the board want to have another
Yes, that's what
meeting
I was
on
going to
this
ask for,
before.
Frank. I was going to ask for that.
There's also an option on your first meeting in October at your regular board meeting. There's nothing that prevents you from having a discussion at a board meeting. If you choose, we can schedule that is an opportunity for having some discussions without an specific agenda item. So that is another option. Since this is something you've discussed in workshop, but it's just now, how many more workshops do you want to schedule? And you can use a board meeting for that.
Shirley?
early on in the discussions, you talked about our charter schools figured into this. And another thing that I was thinking about was private schools. And I went on the website and I went to look it up, and I can't find exactly where it is, but there's a spot on the Department of Education website where they give reports on private schools. And 10 years ago, private school enrollment was about 366,000. And then I think it was a combination of the Great Recession and charter schools, where the enrollment in private schools actually went down. In fact, it's down. It started to pick up, and it's on the upswing now, but it's about at 353,000 right now. It isn't growing that fast, except it's growing by the number of students who get the scholarships now. And then next year, it's going to greatly expand those who are who it's available to. In fact, I think probably about 60% of our enrollment would be available if they wanted to and if there was space available. But there hasn't been much of a swing over there from what I saw in the numbers. It's been an increase in those getting the scholarships, but not in the overall enrollment numbers, if that helps any.
But that's still my concern, because there's a lot of unknowns out there, whether we have the charter schools in place or not have them in place. I mean, they definitely are going to impact us in the, not Northport, in the Venice area, whether they decide to build that high school on the SCF campus or not. That's going to impact us, whether we need a high school or not. I mean, all of these things are going to impact us. So it's hard to make a decision, well, we have to, based on when we really don't have all of the information. But I don't think we ever will have it until it happens. So we're going to have to make the decision somewhat in the unknown.
Yeah, we're falling into Al's cone of uncertainty again, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
It's a big black hole of uncertainty.
Anything else for staff today?
One point I want to make on the charter school question. I should have, and I'm mistaken. When I said the 15%, that was also inclusion of private schools as well as homeschooling or virtual schooling. It was for the whole breadth, and we have assessed some of the schools that we are aware that could be out there, and we still are confident at our 15% level for two reasons. One, we think the middle schools are still going to continue to be the area that those schools are going to attract the most, and that's where we have our greatest level of capacity. And secondly, the schools that we are aware of that are outside of the middle schools have such small capacity numbers that they're proposing that they wouldn't really affect the overall study that we've done.
I wanted to say just one thing for the board's information, too, that Kathy and I got to sit here and give this presentation, but somebody told me a long time ago, if you're in a leadership position, you don't have to be the smartest person in the world, just surround yourself by those who are and get out of their way. This presentation was clearly one of those things. Mickey Ryan and Kathy were kind of the brains behind it. Jody Dumas did the yeoman's work relative to designing and building the spreadsheet that we used for these projections. Just know that there's a whole lot of really strong people who were behind the information you saw today, not just us.
In these scenarios, is the impact or the movement of replacing computers from 4 to 5 years, is that built into any one of these?
Yes.
All of them, one of them,
only
two
one.
of them?
The one that says projects, we've taken $1.5 million out of each of the 10 years from your debt service that would push your computer replenishment program from 4 years to 5.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the only scenario where you see that, though.
Okay.
Good question. I meant to say that.
Anything else? We're adjourned.
Thank you.